Welcome to round 7 of Grand Prix Milwaukee. TJ Rogers and Eduardo Sajkalik. It is Seth Manfield, the #1 ranked player in the world, recent inductee into the Hall of Fame, up against Justin Kanthak. It is Mono Red Aggro against Golgari Midrange, a deck that we haven't had a lot of opportunity to get on camera today.
Yeah, and it was before the favorite deck of a lot of professional players because you can tune it how you want. A little wrinkle, by the way, to that #1. I would say it's 1.5 since Seth lost the Player of the Year playoff to Luis Salvato.
Certainly, yeah. Got a Fanatical Firebrand coming in for Kanthak, and that is going to be dealing just a quick little bit of damage. Taking a look at the deck list here, looks like he is running 3 of those Wild Growth Walkers, which have been really increasing in number from what we saw about a week ago.
Yeah, Wild Growth Walker is just a really strong engine against these aggressive decks, as well even against the Izzet Phoenix deck. So it's very easy to have Wild Growth Walker plus these Explore creatures as a package. Sev deciding to go for that package plus a little more instant speed removal and Planeswalkers.
And it's going to be Druid of the Cowl coming down as the turn 2, following up a Runaway Steamkin, which is currently a 1/1, but is going to be looking to grow pretty rapidly. 3 mountains on the battlefield there for Justin Kanthak. And any red spell is going to start putting a +1/+1 counter on that Steamkin. When there's 3, you can remove them to add red, red, red. And there is an attack in.
This is, Justin has Shock in hand. But I believe here there's almost no chance for Seth to block. So something like Goblin Chainwhirler would have dealt more damage pre-combat since, it seems like it's just boosting the Steamkin by 1, but with that additional damage, Seth can't block, since the 1/free would have a damage. So playing in pre-combat would have been an extra point of damage here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Essentially, then Seth's Druid would have a damage, and the 2/2 can get through. So.
And because it's a 2/2, it wouldn't even die to the 1 power. So that'd be a really safe attack.
Right. It's mostly like Justin probably wanting to use the Shock, but it makes sense that the Chainwhirler would come down. So, yeah. But that's okay. Now Seth, though, passing the turn, and if I'm Justin, in my mind, the card is Vraska's Contempt.
Yep, with 2 swamps available, 2 green mana as well. Not an enormous amount of spells that are getting cast on the opponent's turn out of this green-black deck, so the options are relatively limited. We've got the attack in here for 5 with the 1/4 hanging back. 3 mountains still available. That Shock also still in the wings could point that to the face, and that would actually grow that Steamkin up to being a 3/3, threatening to kill the Druid of the Cowl.
Right, and here it's pretty trivial for Seth to block, since if Seth has Vraska's Contempt, it would make sense anyways to get rid of the the Runaway Steamkin. So here you're going to see Shock pointed at Seth, but Seth should be able to just cast the Vraska's Contempt and get rid of the Runaway Steamkin here.
And there it is. So he's going to gain 2 life back, eliminate that one. The Druid of the Cowl is going to remain, and there is going to be the Goblin Chainwhirler still around.
Turned out Seth managed to get a Shock out of Justin's hand here. So instead of killing one of Seth's future creatures or taking down a Planeswalker, that Shock was used to just deal 2 damage to Seth. Seth essentially blocking here since it was mostly free.
Yep, and so now Seth Manfield at 14 up against the 20 life, and it is Karn, Scion of Urza, coming down to the battlefield. Still a 1/3 back to protect it if absolutely necessary, but also 6 loyalty.
Yeah, the big thing with the Druid here is you can get rid of a haste creature trying to attack the Karn. You could also block the Goblin Chainwhirler here. As you say, 6 loyalty is a ton. Usually you need something like Goblin Chainwhirler plus a Burn Spell, but even then Seth is happy to gain 6 life against Justin. Justin really needs an Experimental Frenzy to kind of take over here.
And he is running, I believe, 4 copies of that in his deck. This is, actually, he's on 3 copies, reducing that one down and supporting it with 2 copies of Risk Factor.
Yeah, deciding to, it seems lower the curve, although just having 2 Wizard's Lightning, I feel like Wizard's Lightning is actually one of the payoffs for being in mono red, so I kind of like playing the full 4, even though sometimes it can be clunky.
And on Seth's turn here, we've got 5 mana available. Trying to get up to having 6 mana. There is the Carnage Tyrant, which is a pretty popular strategy for these green-black decks, though. its effectiveness against mono red, I'm not certain if they consider it quite as effective as it would be against the blue decks.
Yeah. I mean, it still acts as a very good blocker, right? It can stop anything the mono red deck is doing, so it's maybe not the best card in the matchup, but it does, give Seth the ability to, if there was a Carnage Tyrant, right, to just block without worry. But here what was important was Justin decided not to go after the Karn, which I believe is the correct approach for the mono red deck in a position like this. Justin isn't going to win a game going after this Karn Sign of Urza, and it's probably best off ignoring it and trying to deal as much damage as possible to Seth.
In a dangerous position here, because that Karn Plus, it did put a forest into Seth Manfield's hand, but what he's also got available is a Wild Growth Walker beneath it. Vraska's Contempt eliminating the Chain Whirler. Seth going to go back up to 13, and if he's got any of those Explore creatures in his hand, he's going to be able to combine those with that Wild Growth Walker to gain a really solid chunk of life back and grow that Wild Growth Walker into a pretty formidable threat.
Right, but even then, Justin more than likely has a removal spell for the Wild Growth Walker. But at that point, you're kind of okay, like you're not taking that damage. Your deck has, free copies of Find Finality, so having creatures in your graveyard, like, you're generating value. This is exactly the type of game that the green-black deck wants to play. It's just this kind of value game. So here, Seth is really taking ahead, and, here you cast a J-Light Ranger. Justin doesn't have a removal spell, the game's over. Justin has a removal spell, while Seth still, gets to get that Walker, still gets value. But the Explore still happened, by the way. It's not because the J-Light Ranger's gone. So since Seth managed to kind of hit that, gaining that 6 life here, very big game.
And that J-Light Ranger, the Explorers from it, end up revealing a land to go to the hand. And on the next one, there's a Vraska's Contempt that is going to stay up top. That'll be the draw for next turn. And now this Wild Growth Walker is a 3/5. That is not an easy amount of toughness to be dealt with by this red deck.
Right. And it's not just that it's not easy, right, to deal that damage, is that even in this scenario, it's 2 cards. It's more cards that aren't pointed at, say, Seth's, being aggressive against Seth. And at this position, Justin has no cards. Look at this position, right? Justin has 0 cards. Seth is at 19 life, has a better board, has a Planeswalker that keeps ticking up in advantage. And, yeah, I mean, Seth is extremely favored here. The only card that can give Justin a chance here is Experimental Frenzy, and even then, you're weak to something like Vivian Reed coming down and destroying that card.
Looks like we're going to have another 3-mana play here, and it is going to be Midnight Reaper, an attack in for 1. It's got a little bit of power on it, and if any removal spells do come down for some of these creatures, you draw cards.
Yeah, Seth would be more than happy to trade Midnight Reaper for a card. But it doesn't really matter. Anything that's active is going to make Seth go ahead, and this Karn is going to make it much easier to get to what's needed. Since at that point, you're looking at free cards a turn. You're drawing a card, you're looking at 2 cards with Karn, minusing Karn to get one of the cards you want, totally fine. So Seth, able to look at free cards a turn, better board, better life total, just going to take down this game 1, unless Justin can find a miracle Experimental Frenzy.
An abundance of land also available to Seth. He just continues to draw it. But we're going to go for this Merfolk Branchwalker, cast that rather than take his chances with the top of the deck, and it is another land. That's going to go to his hand, and we're just going to kick it back. But that is a pretty solid amount of pressure on the battlefield. It is 6 damage. Justin currently at 14, and really just getting 1 or 2 cards, getting 1 card per turn to work with. It's Chain Whirler and Runaway Steamkin, though, not a bad combination.
Yeah, but the Chain Whirler actually here is a drawback. Killing that Branchwalker is not actually something that Justin wants to do, because Seth, at a very healthy 19 life, is going to draw a card off this Midnight Reaper, and that's actually not where Justin wants to be.
Well, he does lose a life for his trouble. The Midnight Reaper, it's you lose a life, draw a card.
Right, and normally that's fine, but when Seth is at 19 life going to 17, that's not really going to help much. And yeah, extra cards are so valuable for Seth.
And that 3/2, and whoa, man, that was Branchwalker and Carnage Tyrant, which means that Tyrant is available anytime that Seth needs it. There is a Llanowar Elf going to the graveyard, and that's going to put a +1/+1 counter onto this Branchwalker. The board continuing to grow, and against this Chain Whirler, difficult to get aggressive, but I don't really think that Seth's in any hurry.
No. Seth is more than content to sit back, get the Carnage Tyrant, and start putting pressure. The main thing Seth is lacking is an answer to a top deck Experimental Frenzy. But Seth, again, looking at a ton of cards, access to Midnight Reaper to draw more. And yeah, you're going to see here the Carnage Tyrant get played. And Seth is more than happy to trade the Carnage Tyrant. It would be drawing a card, you got a Memorial to Folly to recast it immediately. And here, Vraska's Contempt. Seth going to be able to put on quite a bit of pressure, potentially.
And in addition to that, now that's enough. Justin is just going to pick up the cards. Doesn't even need to see that Carnage Tyrant hit the battlefield, but there was the mana available for it. That is going to take us into Game 2. And this Golgari mid-range, let's talk about it a little bit. It's a very versatile deck, so what can you tell me about the way that this one was built and how it's approaching this aggro matchup?
Sure. By playing 2 Druids of the Cull on top of the 4 Llanowar Elves, it's positioning itself to be kind of a half-ramp deck, right? You're not trying to go like way over the top, but by playing these additional mana creatures, you get to cast a Karn Sign of Urza relatively consistently on turn 3. You get to Vivian Reed on a clean board in an easier fashion, and you get access to free copies of Carnage Tyrant as a payoff, right? These mana accelerants allowing you for these payoff cards. So you're hoping by using these mana accelerants to recoup the cards via the Planeswalkers that you've lost by playing, 1/1s for 1 and 1 freeze for 2. Now, that said, in the sideboard, that's where Seth kind of can modulate the deck, right? Normally, you don't want to board in cards that are too expensive in a deck like this, since you are packing all the power in the main deck. So your sideboard is going to be... There's only one really power card, and that's Vraska Relic Seeker. That's the one power card in the sideboard that Seth can ramp into. But something like the Eldest Reborn also works, but you see efficient cards like Duress. You won't see these Duresses come in, but the 2 cast downs, the Assassin's Trophy, key to destroy both the pressure from Justin and a potential Experimental Frenzy. Even something like a Doom Whisper can just dominate the board, and we'll likely see it here.
All right, and from the mono-red deck, now this one much more on that aggressive side with the Experimental Frenzies, not doing some of that big mana stuff that we saw last round. But heading into the sideboard, a lot of these red decks are transitioning into a big mana strategy. Are we going to see something similar from this one?
Yeah, we're probably going to see the deck morph to get more card advantage in. So you're going to see that 4th Experimental Frenzy come in. Treasure Map, sometimes worthwhile. The problem is the card is very weak to Vivian Reed. Now, Vivian Reed is not a very good card in this matchup. The problem with the card is you need an empty board, and then on top of that, like, the effect you're having is not that powerful, but it does answer Frenzy. So you know that the Golgari mid-range players might shave 1 at most, but will still keep it. So at that point, Treasure Map might be a liability if not played exactly on turn 2. But Treasure Map supports well, the free Fight with Fires, allowing you to sometimes get to the kicker, and that's where you want to be. We're going to see that the Experimental Frenzy. We might see the Direfleet Daredevils. They're actually pretty good size against a lot of the Golgari mid-range creatures, a lot of them being free 2s. But once you see Druid of the Cowl, it gets a lot worse. But very good to get some of the key removal spells like Cast Down, Vraska's Contempt, especially in a long game, facing Planeswalkers, being able to go Direfleet Daredevil, Vraska's Contempt, or Planeswalker is a reasonable line.
All right, so they're going to be lining up here for Game 2. Seth Manfield on Golgari midrange did take Game 1, so it's going to be the aggro deck that is going to be kicking off with its aggressive take. And these are both really decks. I just want to mention a bit about how, that's how they're going to approach each other. But both of these decks, how do you think that they did building their deck for the overall expected meta? That kind of mixture of... There was the very kind of public-facing, the top 8, which was filled with those white aggressive decks, and then there was sort of the reality beneath it, which was that there was this really large swath of very viable decks. And how do you think that these two players did in approaching their deck-building considerations for that field?
Justin did it in a very simple way, which is that the mono-red aggro deck is usually favored against the mono-white decks. Or the base white decks, I guess, is a better way of putting it. Mm-hmm. So at that point, he just went with the deck choice that most naturally countered that. On the other side, Seth, a little more minute on the changes, right? Seth, with his build of kind of ramping extra Planeswalkers, the aim of Seth's deck is to out mid-range other mid-range decks, but not by a ton, just by a little bit, having those Karn Sign of Urza's being a key key way to do so. Having more mana and going just a tiny bit bigger than the other mid-range decks will, while having 1 or 2 additional removal spells. You know, there's 2 cast down, there's 3 Ravenous Chupacabras. So Seth really looking to tune his deck against aggro, mid-range, have some game against the Izzet Drake's deck, but very weak to, say, potentially a control deck Karn, a Planeswalker, but not a very good threat against those decks. So at that point, by not being able to put too much pressure, might be a bit weaker to something like a control, Jeskai control deck.
Yeah, I'm really curious. I'm liking seeing a lot of these red decks and the different ways that they're being built. We've seen those really large mana ones that we've seen. You know, Sam Black has been one that we saw earlier, and he's been doing pretty well. We saw some last round, but we're going to head into Game 2 here. And it's always interesting to see the mono-red aggro deck post-board just playing some massive spells to where it doesn't really look like the same deck at all.
Yeah. And there's a question here on how Justin's choosing to morph the deck. And you see there that Direfleet Daredevil already at the front of the hand. And that's kind of a nice card in the sense that it can both put pressure on Seth while getting card advantage a bit later.
It's going to be a mountain to kick things off, followed up by an overgrown tomb from Manfield. Another mountain, and that's going to be joined by a runaway Steamkin. Let's see if this one can run away with the game. It is the first creature on the board, and that's going to be followed up by a Merfolk Branchwalker. Land on top, which is going to go right to the hand for Manfield. Back to Kanthak.
Yeah, and by the way, here... oh, wow, nice 1-2 little punch. Runaway Steamkin, Goblin Chain Whirler, get rid of the Branchwalker. That's how you draw it up. But yeah, Justin, by the way, running 3 Lava Coils and a 4th in the sideboard, really more prepared for the mid-range mirrors and worried about the card Venerated Loxodon. Not a card in this match, but you can see that the presence of that card in the format and in the top 8 of Pro Tour Guilds of Ravnica has meant that people have liked playing that spell. So we might see a very good weekend for the control decks.
And that's Jadelight Ranger comes down. Memorial to Folly going to the hand for Manfield. For the second Explorer, it's going to be Karn Scion of Urza, but that one is going to be heading right to the graveyard. It's not what Manfield's looking for.
Right. Karn, very good on an empty board or with a mana accelerate. Not very good in this situation where Justin has control of the board. And Justin here can have a really powerful turn. The Runaway Steamkin is going to go up all the way. But I think here it's better for, Justin just to put pressure. Just deal 7 damage to Seth with this board.
Just.
Fine. Just.
Big hit. Manfield down to 10 after that swing. And that Runaway Steamkin is able to, at a later point, remove those +1/+1 counters, add red, 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 and whatever those spells that you cast are going to refill those +1/+1 counters for it. So it's able to restock itself by giving you the mana to actually cast those spells.
Yeah, the main problem for Seth here is just not having access to cheap removal. Something like a Ravenous Chupacabra would be okay being able to deal with the Runaway Steamkin while dealing with this board. But something like Karn here is just not what you want. I mean, this construct is just a roadblock for this massive board from Justin.
Yep, no other artifacts on the battlefield, so that is just a 1/1 construct. Just about anything would answer it. Any kind of shock, even another Goblin Chain Whirler. And really, all of these cards are able to attack anyway.
Yeah, I mean, Lava Coil here.
Oh, wow.
This is lethal damage, I believe, yeah.
That was a huge swing in for 11 after the Lava Coil on that token, and Justin Kanthak lost game 1, but in game 2, that was decisive. That was exactly how it wanted to go. Every single turn, Kanthak was putting the pressure on Seth Manfield and really putting him into a position to have a response or fall further and further behind.
Yeah, and that was really it. Seth did not have the cheap removal to kind of take over the game, so that meant the plan with the Planeswalker kind of falls flat as a result. And Justin just easily took over. Because when the red deck gets to curve out and deal damage with creatures, that's when it gets really favored. The problem for the red deck is usually if its creatures get dealt with, then you're left with some burn spells that may not be adequate for the task. So that's why you kind of see also the red deck morph into red mid-range-ish decks post-board rather than being burn-focused, because you essentially need a board to be able to win, especially in standard. It's almost impossible to burn your opponent from 20, so you're going to have to play a more mid-range plan, just a few more threats, so that you can go over losing a few of the more conditional cards. For example, Shock, I mean, it's okay but against these black-green decks, but not against something that Seth is proposing. Even though Seth has Llanowar Elf, Shock, not really good against, say, Wild Growth Walker. And while you can't kill the Explorer creatures, that's not really working into your game plan. That's helping the Green-Black's game plan.
Okay, so sideboarding kind of for what the opponent is going to be really shifting into. This does seem like a format where almost every matchup we're seeing this really big emphasis on combat damage, but it's even in ways that are a little bit unusual to what I'm seeing. You know, even Jeskai Control now running Crackling Drakes, trying to get in through the air. There's this emphasis on having some kind of way to turn the corner, get it done with those creatures.
Yeah, and you're going to need that creature damage, right? A reason the Arclight Phoenix deck or the Izzet Drakes deck is so strong is because once one of those creatures survives, it just hits for 10 damage. So here, but you know what? That Runaway Steamkin was not that dissimilar. Chain Whirler cleared the way, that was 2 damage. Then we had our turn where Runaway Steamkin got the 4, that's 4 damage. And then we got another hit for 4. So the Steamkin on its own was already 10 damage. Thanks to the supporting cast, right, of Goblin Chain Whirler and Red Burn spells.
And that wasn't even with really where the Steamkin shines is alongside that Experimental Frenzy, where you're able to just start ripping those cards off the top, and as they refill up the battlefield, grab some more red mana, keep churning through it, refill the Steamkin, and even on its own, not using that activated ability, it was a 2-mana 4/4 that ran away with the game.
Well, 2-mana 4/4s are usually really good in Standard.
That's right. Excellent.
You tend to play a lot of them. Format defining, as they say.
It seems to be doing a pretty good job of finding its way here in Milwaukee.
Yeah, and you know, the thing with the red decks is they get better as more cards get added in. So right now, I think the red decks are lacking a little bit of punch, but you know, as more sets come into Standard, you get like the 1 or 2 better creatures or removal spells, and you know, we've seen that a lot. The last 2 Standard formats, the red deck was kind of the best one pre-rotation because you had the maximum amount of red cards to play. But it's interesting that they still exist, you know, in a format that favors these 2-color decks like Golgari Midrange, Izzet Drakes, Selesnya tokens.
A lot of options in this Standard. I am really enjoying that just about anybody that you see playing a deck, there's a very good chance that they are playing a deck that is in the exact style that they want to find themselves in.
Right. You get to pick and choose. There's really, you're a control player, there's a control deck for you. You're a tempo player, there's kind of a deck for you. You know, you're a mid-range player, Overgrown Tomb's back.
All right, so it's heading into Game 3. This will be the decider of this match in Round 7, and the play is going to go to Manfield. I mean, that number 1 next to his name has got to be a pretty good statement of how he's doing in this tournament, how he's feeling. He's been on an absolute tear lately when it comes down to it. I mean, he was competing in the final playoff for Player of the Year a week ago.
I mean, Seth is just a dominant player, and the result of that incredible season that just came by was enough for people to consider him and elect him into the Hall of Fame. So now it's Hall of Famer Seth Manfield, you know, as of last week.
Previous, of course, he was the world champion from 2015. He's also won the Pro Tour, which was actually Ixalan, was the Pro Tour that he was the victor for. He's also just racked up a slew of top 8s within those Pro Tours. I think he's gotten 15 Grand Prix top 8s.
Yeah, and you know, 4 Pro Tour top 8s plus a World Championship title. He's an extremely good player. I mean, I've played against Seth in some pretty high pressure situations, and I've given it my all, but Seth is just incredible.
Is there something about his playstyle, the way that he approaches the game, that really stands out to you, that sets him apart?
He goes far deeper in strategic mindset than most people. He just considers, like, he's not considering really just the play on one turn. Like, he'll be more likely to draw in matches. Like, he just understands matchups far more than most people do. And I think that's what sets him apart, is just understanding what the game plan is far, far in advance compared to other people.
Gitu Lava Runner coming down to the battlefield on turn 1 for Kanthax. Seth Manfield kicking things off with a tapped land. And heading into his turn 2, this has been where we've consistently seen things like either Merfolk Branchwalker or that Wild Growth Walker, but no actions here from Manfield, just kicking the turn back.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, Wild Growth Walker would be okay, Merfolk Branchwalker would be okay, but it turns out that not having a 2-drop lines well against Justin's hand. Justin has a lot of removal in hand, And if Seth just has also a lot of removal, that favors Seth. Seth would rather play the game where both players have access to a ton of removal, since you just get to eventually slam a Carnage Tyrant, which does not care about all these cards in front.
And it's a duress coming down. We're going to take a look and grab one of these non-creatures. There's Lava Coil, Risk Factor, and Fight with Fire. Taking the Risk Factor a little bit unfortunate because it does have Jumpstart, but Lava Coil and Fight with Fire also very good considerations. Goblin Chain Whirler, the only creature currently in hand.
Yeah, looking at Seth's list, Fight with Fire is just a very inefficient Lava Coil, except for the kicker. So usually in a spot like this, depending on Seth's hand might dictate something else, but taking Lava Coil would make sense. Risk Factor, again, as you say, Jumpstart, so you might as well not take it really in a spot like this. You prevent the second cast, which can be important. You might be able to take 4 but not 8, but I think here taking the Lava Coil making sense. It's the cheapest option. It also exiles, and these green-black decks, they have Memorial to Folly. You want your cards to go to the graveyard.
And also you've got 3 copies of Find, with the other half being Finality, but that Find is able to grab 2 creatures out of the graveyard as well and return them to your hand.
Yeah, the thing is, Seth has to board out quite a few cards, so maybe 1 or 2 copies of Find Finality come out, which is, so there's less value there. But yeah, Jade Light Ranger here, Ravenous Chupacabra. As long as Seth has a land in hand, this seems like a really good card to have on the top. But if Seth's putting that in the graveyard, there's probably not. Yeah, you definitely don't keep Karn over it. So at that point, if I was in Justin's seat, I would either believe that Seth is looking for mana or already has a powerful turn 4 play, and that choice will be informed based on what's going on next turn.
Yeah. By the look of it, Manfield is going to be struggling on that drop next turn, and Kenthek playing out the 4th mana. We know about the Fight with Fire in hand, which could remove this Jade Light Ranger, though it does only have 3 toughness anyway. It's not going to be very involved in this combat. Also does have access to Risk Factor, which is an instant, so that could be fired off either this turn or during Seth's turn if he would rather be a little bit, wait until the last possible moment.
Yeah, there's no need to fire off the Risk Factor now. You can actually, since there's nothing else you're going to do with the mana.
Yeah, and the consideration there is maybe if there's a 1-mana creature that you could put down to be able to attack with it next turn.
Seth just doesn't know where the last card in Justin's hand is, and there's the Ravenous Chupacabra, so it makes sense that Seth would put it in the graveyard. Here's Seth going to easily take 4. Any card that Justin draws here would be compounded, but yeah. By the way, Risk Factor and Experimental Frenzy are maybe not, best of friends.
It's a dangerous game that Justin is playing with 3 copies of Frenzy and 2 copies of Risk Factor. Usually once that Frenzy is out, you'll just put the cards in their hand.
Yeah. What you do, though, is you just cast the Risk Factor first and bait them into Pain for Life.
Ooh, there we go.
But yeah, here you can just see how this matchup can favor the green-black player heavily. Seth just took 8, and honestly, it doesn't... Oh, wow. And yeah, it doesn't matter. This is going to... I think this Wild Growth Walker might meet the Fight with Fire because there's not much otherwise that Justin can do. But Justin is now at a low 10 life and almost no way to pressure Seth or Seth's board. Just the Fight with Fire, but that's going to leave Seth with quite a board still. So even something like that Kitu Lava Runner and Fight with Fire, that's not going to allow Justin to really come back. You're playing it.
We're going to eliminate it, and it's just going to be staying back on blocking duty. It is interesting that Seth's been navigating this matchup. We have not seen any Vraska's Contempt or Wild Growth Walkers that have actually gained the life. This has just been through grinding out with the cards that he's got available to him, using that Ravenous Chupacabra, using things like the Cast Down to try and mitigate whatever damage he can.
Yeah, and here, that Lava Runner could have attacked, put Seth down to 5, but this is very telling as to how favored Seth is. Justin with no cards in hand. You can see that Seth just uses a Vraska's Contempt here, deals 6 damage. Now Justin has to find, answers and frets, but there's only 1 card a turn, so...
So we are down to 4. Seth back up to 9, and that is going to be the handshake. Game 3 is going to go to Seth Manfield, which is going to put him right up into that 6-1 record, which is a really nice way to position yourself heading into the final round. This is round 7, round 8. coming up, and that's really going to be a lot of decisive things before heading into the next day.
Right. You kind of want to finish day one at 7-1 if you're trying to make a top 8 run. 8-0 is obviously amazing, but you can't always have that record. 6-2 is when you get to have a nice day usually, but trying to run top 8 from 6-2 is very difficult.
All right, well, we are going to have some more Magic for you from round 7 right after this.